Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. Today I wanted to take a moment to look at some of the comments from my video that I did about the ASU students. And then I'm going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into some background that I think may be missing from the discussion generally. And as I've said before, I'm a big fan of the First Amendment. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I believe that it should be extended as far as possible. But I'm also not a fan of violence in any form, and I also believe that if you're going to protest, you need to abide by the policies and the time, place, and manner restrictions that are imposed on demonstration and protest as they are allowed to be under the First Amendment. So let's jump into some of these comments now. This first one comes from Velociraptor 89. And he says, in all fairness to this woman, she seems to have readily accepted the reality of her situation, although she is certainly not pleased with the outcome. For her to say that she would do it again even knowing the outcome, well, I have to at least give her credit there. She isn't blaming the situation on others. I personally believe her suspension was just, but I'm actually somewhat surprised at her demeanor and candor. It's interesting, at least. Okay. I think that's probably a good observation, and one really that I probably should have made, in that she is accepting responsibility for what happened. She's saying, yeah, I got suspended, and yeah, I'd do it again. If you go and watch the video on Twitter, what you'll see is she continues to refer to the cause. And so it begs the question of what is this cause that she is talking about? And we'll get a little bit more into that here in just a moment. Let's move on to the next comment. Here is Nora Rivkis, 2513. She says, I used to be a political science student, and I remember writing a paper about the difference between terrorism and satyagraha. I don't even know what that term is. It came to mind when you were talking about the distinction between these violent protests and the people who humbly went to jail for genuine civil disobedience, because you said something that came close to what I wrote about, just in different words. You see, civil disobedience, the real kind, is a way of sending a very particular message. That message is, I am so certain that my cause is right that I'm willing to suffer for it. It's a powerful message when it's used correctly, but it doesn't work when it's tainted by any hint of violence. When you bring violence into it, the message becomes, I am so certain that my cause is right that I'm willing to make you suffer for it. And again, I think that is an exceptionally valid point. And it amazes me how many great comments I get on videos all the time, and this is just another good example of one. All of the people who are protesting, if they're protesting peacefully and nonviolently, they believe in it. So we'll get a little bit more to the peaceful aspect of it in just a moment, but let's look now at the next comment. This one is also from our friend Nora. She says, my father went to college in the 60s when students were taking over college campuses all over the country. His own school didn't tend to go to extremes, but at one point there was a small sit-in at the administration building. The administration asked the students what their demands were. What were they seeking from the administration? Let's talk, they said. The protesters were confused. They hadn't thought that far ahead. They were doing this pretty much because students at all the other colleges did it, and they thought it was cool. Every one of them was expelled, not because they protested, but because they had protested stupidly and hadn't actually bothered to have an intention for what they were doing. The rest of the student body supported the administration, those who noticed the whole situation, which by no means was all of them. They might have supported a serious protest, but they couldn't abide idiocy. It does sort of give you the idea that a lot of this is social in nature. In other words, hey, everybody's protesting down on the quad. Let's go down and protest, without really stopping to think about what is it that we're protesting in favor of. So that brings us to the next comment, which is just because someone thinks they're doing the right thing doesn't shield them from the consequences. The various campuses that had large or extended protests couldn't operate as schools, which is their primary function. I also noticed that there wasn't protests in other public forums, like the town state building, at least from what I saw reported. Now, that's a really good point. Finally, let's move on to the fifth one that I want to talk about, which is Paul Lovelace from Cincinnati. He says, JD, despite the university telling the protesters what was going to happen, it does not make the actions of the university right. The students were sticking up for what they believe in. By the mere act of assembling, they were not violent. And to a certain extent, that is true. They were not violent at ASU, although they did resist arrest. And I have a comment that I've put up back since I made this that essentially notices that there were 72 people arrested, and 80% of the people arrested were not students. Only 15 of those 72 were actually students, which tells you something. But one of the themes in this that I've picked up on, and you probably noticed from the comments that I chose, is this idea that people were protesting about something that they believe in. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the young lady in the video and think that perhaps she was protesting because she's just against war, and maybe she doesn't want to see war, and she doesn't care who's right and who's wrong. She just wants there to be peace. Maybe that's her position. In many of these protest demonstrations, they have been chanting the Hamas thing about from the river to the sea, which begs the question of how many of these people who are protesting have ever read the Hamas covenant. Let's take a look at some of these things, and maybe we want to start with thinking about the idea of doing a little bit of background investigation before you actually protest in favor or against something. The protests are aimed at Israel, which essentially means that the protesters are supporting Hamas. Now, I don't know if that was this young lady's intention to support Hamas or not, but that was, generally speaking, the whole aim of these protests. We want to protest to support Hamas. I think one of the things that would be very beneficial here is for people to understand what Hamas is and what its goals are. So I'm going to go through that here in just a little bit. We're going to start with looking at some of the things that are on Snopes, and then we're going to go to some of Hamas's actual documents and doctrine. So one of the sites you can usually go to get something approaching the true deal on things that have happened is Snopes. There are many people who criticize Snopes, and not without reason. But here is the first page that I came across on Snopes. It's what is Hamas and what is its role in Gaza? It's a militant group that governs the Gaza Strip and has been designated a terrorist organization. And if you drill down a little bit on this article, it says that Hamas's primary aim, according to its 1988 charter, is to resist Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories and establish an Islamic Palestinian state in its place. To be clear, Hamas's goal is to eliminate 9,043,387 people so that they can have access to 8,470 square miles. That is the very definition of genocide. I think it is worth noting that that is the goal that they set out in their charter, in their covenant. But Hamas has a doctrine too, and the doctrine of Hamas from the Wilson Center is pretty instructive. They say Hamas is an Arabic acronym for the Islamic resistance movement. It's called on members of two other Abrahamic faiths, Judaism and Christianity, to accept Islamic rule in the Middle East. Quote, it is the duty of the followers of other religions to stop disputing the sovereignty of Islam in this region, because the day these followers should take over there will be nothing but carnage, displacement, and terror, it decreed. Hamas also rejected any prospect of peace or coexistence with the State of Israel. Initiatives, proposals, and international conferences are all a waste of time and vain endeavors. The Palestinian people know better than to consent to having their future rights and fate toyed with. So essentially, what we have here is an ideology that is very close to another ideology that was pretty popular in 1939, that had a lot of people signing on and getting involved and, marching to the tune of what amounted to nationalism. Unfortunately, those people wore swastikas on their arms, and they murdered 6 million Jews and, among other things, people that they considered to be undesirables like gypsies and people who were gay. The idea that you could support Hamas without embracing its essentially Nazi ideology of the elimination of Jews and this whole river to the sea thing is essentially we're going to push you all out and kill you all. That, I think, is something that people need to step back from and look at before they decide to support this kind of movement. And when I looked at the young lady who was the ASU student, I did not see a Nazi. But then again, there were an awful lot of Germans during World War II who weren't necessarily Nazis, but essentially went along with it. And when you are protesting in favor of an ideology that essentially wants to wipe out an entire race of people, I question whether or not you actually believe in that when you're up there waving the signs. I don't think this young lady believes that what happened on October 7th was right. While I had originally planned to go into some detail about what happened on October 7th, I decided that probably wasn't something any of my subscribers needed to see or hear. However, I am going to link one story out of the Times of Israel in my comment section, in my description, that provides some graphic images that they've blurred them out, but still they establish just exactly what kind of people we're dealing with here with Hamas. Now, generally speaking, in the law of armed conflict, there are two kinds of people, combatants and non-combatants. You can kill combatants, you can attack combatants. What you can't do is attack people who are innocent civilians. And that is essentially what Hamas did. There is a lot of evidence out there that many Palestinians have been killed in the attack by Israel against Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, and I understand that. And I think that's terrible. I wish that had not occurred, but you have to understand that Hamas is hiding behind basically human shields. That's the reason they took hostages. And the idea that they took over 240 hostages to begin with, and there are now less than 33 of them, and many of them may not be alive, I think that should give us real pause for thinking about supporting Hamas. If someone believes fervently that Hamas is in the right here, they have absolute right to protest. And I would exercise my First Amendment right to say that I think they are odious people who have no place in a civil society. But they still have the right to protest, just the way the Westboro Baptist Church does, just the way the Ku Klux Klan does. I understand that the reason that we protect speech is because it's a slippery slope once you start regulating it and once you start controlling what people can and cannot say. So I support their absolute right to protest. I just think they're odious people for doing so, especially given what happened on October 7th. That's what I have for you today. If you have any questions, put them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all the stuff we ask you to do. And thank you again for your comments. They were great and they were thought-provoking, and I learned some stuff. I think many of you understand how to comment on a video, and I think that a lot of you could teach people who comment on other videos that I see all the time. So I appreciate all of you doing it the way that you have, especially those of you who disagree with me. And hey, I welcome the disagreement. I'm happy to, engage on that issue. If you have the opportunity today, go out of your way and do something nice for someone. And then, when you're done, come on back down here and join me at the beach, and we'll talk about something else interesting and thought-provoking, and we'll have a good day doing it. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.